Hello and welcome to the Boris FX Virtual IBC session on Continuum and Sapphire for OFX hosts. Today I'm going to be working in Blackmagic Resolve, but the functionality we see today is shared by all Continuum and Sapphire hosts. So we'll begin by taking a look at the Continuum tools. I'll start with my raw clip that I want to apply the effect to. Show the Open Effects Inspector, scroll down past the native effects, and now we see the various units or categories of Continuum tools and the individual effects within each unit. There are over 250, so a good place as any to start will be with the browser. I'll just search for that in the inspector window here and drag the browser effect onto a node in the Resolve node tree. Now there's no UI for this because it's just a browser, so if I hit Launch Effects Browser, this launches in a floating window, and I can work my way through the various categories of effects. So for example, the art looks effect, which gives us kind of graphical stylized looks. So there's some newsprint type halftone effect. If I go into the blurs, for example, take a look at the spiral blurs, I can preview the effect on my live action footage. The category that I'm interested in here is the film style category, so I'll twirl that open. So for example, in the film style category we have fast film process. It gives us quick and easy presets for various film stocks and cross-processing looks, and we can load these up, audition them on the current shot, and then we know which effects to load from the individual modules. I'm going to use the fast film glow effect of this shot. So here's the fast film glow category, and I'll work my way through auditioning some of these presets till I find one that is close to the kind of look that I'm after, this kind of misty sort of horizontal streaks. So I've identified the unit, the individual effect, and the individual preset that I'd like to load. I can't load that from the browser, it's just a browser, so I'll close that and reset the node tree and search for fast film glow. So there's fast film glow. I'll apply that to the current shot. It's applied with its default preset, but there's a localized browser for every one of the effects. So if I launch that, then I can select the preset that I was interested earlier, and I now have the option to apply that directly and have access to its settings in the inspector window here. So worth noting that for all of the Continuum effects there's a quick widget overlaid on the image window. I'm just going to full screen mode here, which gives you quick access to the most commonly used parameters. So I'm going to bring up the glow threshold so it's only triggered off the brightest highlights, decrease the radius a little bit, decrease the intensity a little bit, just so I get a kind of soft, diffuse kind of glow. That's the kind of thing I'm after. Might just go in and change the glow color a little bit, make that something a little bit warmer. Okay. And now I'm good to go. As before and after I applied the effect. I can now save this as a new preset, and that's available in this folder by default, or any other folder that I choose to save to, as a preset file which can be loaded on any other Continuum host, on any other host application, on any other operating system, so they're completely portable throughout the facility. Now that I have applied something artistic and esoteric, it's probably worth noting that technically the footage needs a little bit of work. The handheld pan is a little bit jerky. So in addition to a range of creative tools, the Continuum toolset also includes a range of practical tools, image restoration tools and so on, including stabilization tools like the optical stabilizer. So I'm going to go ahead and search for that and add another node upstream and apply the stabilizer there. I'm going to turn off my my look for the moment and enable the optical stabilizer here. Apply that, and it's asking me to analyze, so I'm going to go ahead and analyze the clip. It runs through and looks at all of the active frames to analyze the motion there. This is processor dependent, so depending on your host platform, I've just got a little old MacBook Pro here, so it's not super fast, but that will go a lot faster on a more modern system. So now that the process is complete, it's now stabilizing translation. If I choose to stabilize translation and rotation, that's now completely locked down for the duration of the clip. But it's a handheld pan, and I want to keep that that pan and some of the organic movement, but I want to take out the high frequency jerkiness. So instead of completely stabilizing, I'm going to change the mode to smoothing, and now set the number of frames over which I'd like to smooth. And now as I play through, you see it's still panning. There's still a little bit of organic motion to it, but it's a lot smoother because I've averaged that that motion out over several frames. There's before and there's after. So now it's technically a little bit more pleasing. I can go and turn on my glow effect to apply the look, and there's the final result. So moving on, we'll take a look at another example of stylizing our footage. In this sequence, you've got a number of shots from sort of an office environment, a rather bland and uninspiring environment. If you want to give this a little bit more punch, one of the tools that's commonly used in broadcast to jazz up kind of verite and reality footage is light leaks. So I'm just going to go ahead and search for that, and I'll drop that on. But what I'll do here, instead of applying it on a clip by clip basis, I'll turn on the timeline node tree, add a serial node, and that will then apply to the entire timeline, spanning all of the shot boundaries. So as we scroll through, that default preset for light leaks is applied across the entire timeline. Once again, I'm going to jump into the effects browser for this effect and audition some of the presets. So I want something quite vibrant, so I'll choose maybe this sort of blue-purple kind of effect, and we'll use that as a starting point. These are procedural effects that use procedural fractals to of infinitely adjustable size to generate the light leak. So probably just want a slight back that off, and that's probably good to go actually. So there's our drab office footage, given a little bit more punch and excitement very quickly. Very commonly used in broadcast as a kind of look development tool for reality footage and so on. So moving on, we're going to take a look at another very popular tool in the Continuum toolset, which is Beauty Studio. So I'll go into full screen mode here, and we can see that if this were a beauty commercial, cosmetics commercial or whatever, that the talent might require a little bit of smoothing work and enhancement of the complexion. So with that in mind, I'm going to search for Beauty Studio and apply that, and it's applied with its default settings. And straight out of the box, it's doing a reasonably good job. By default, it masks the area of interest with a chroma key, which just happens to be set to key off the typical European flesh tones. So we're kind of in the ballpark straight away here. So if I go display the matte, this is the resulting matte that we get keying off these two colours, not the exact colours of the talent. So I'm going to fine-tune that by choosing colour A as the highlight colour and colour B as the shadow colour. So now we're keying off the actual flesh tone of the talent. Because she's blonde, it's catching her hair as well. So we'll probably need to isolate that a little bit, but let's just refine the key a little bit. So review the mask. back off the softness a little bit, close down the hue range, a little bit of blur on the key just to soften the edge off, and we're kind of in the ballpark. We still need to do something about this hair, so quickest way of doing that would be to use a garbage mask, and this is where the Mocha mask component of the pixel chooser comes in. This functionality is available with all of the Continuum tools to isolate our effects to a region of interest. So close down the mat here and then launch Mocha, which will enable me to draw a roto shape and then track that shape's motion using Mocha's award-winning planar tracking. A couple of different ways of doing masks. We can use primitives, we can plot shapes, or we can use Mocha's automated tools to either paint a shape, or my favourite, which is the magnetic spline tool, which does most of the work for me. It detects where the edges are. So you see this blue line is auto detected, and then when I want to draw, I just hold the mouse down and draw, and then when I want to automatically plot, I just release the mouse and tap down wherever I want to create a vertex. So I'll close that shape. So there's the shape that I want to work with. Show the highlight of the mat there. And now I want to track that as the clip moves through time. So with the tracking tools, I can track forward. Once again, the speed of tracking is dependent upon the host's compute resources, so this will go a lot faster on something other than my little MacBook here. But once I've tracked that shape, we'll stop that there. Now we have the planar tracking applied to that shape. I'll save that down, and now when we view the mask, you can see the mask is a combination of the chroma key and the Mocha mask that I've tracked there. I'll twirl that mask section open and add a little bit of feathering to the shape to soften that off, and now we can go back to looking at the effect parameters, the specific effect parameters. So if we toggle it off and on, you'll see that it's already doing quite a good job with the default settings. If I twirl open the smoothing controls, this is where we can apply the overall smoothing. So this is the smoothing being applied. If I go crazy with that, you can see that you can see what it's doing, hopefully over the streaming video. And basically what we have here is a number of different smoothing algorithms applied to different levels of image frequency. So if I go in here and adjust the smoothing or sharpening of the smallest details, that brings out the finest details like the pores of the skin. Then it gets progressively larger details such as the wrinkles, laugh lines, and the more broad features. We can adjust the smoothing of each of these different frequencies independently. So I'll just bring that to a kind of setting that looks fairly natural, and now we're kind of good to go with our setup. And that Mocha mask that I tracked previously, that can be exported to other Continuum effects either on the same host or any other host or any other operating system. Completely portable setups across all host applications. So moving on, we're going to take a look at an example of combination of look development and motion graphics in this case. So what we have here is a section of clips about a protest. I want a stylistic look to this this section, so I'm going to use Grunge, which uses procedural textures to combine with the image to create a stylized look. This is the default setting. So once again, I'll launch into the effects browser and audition some of the presets here. So basically different ways of messing up the image, make it look kind of gritty and degraded. I'm going to use this one old grungy film 2 as a starting point. So there's the starting point. A little bit overcooked, I think, for being able to see the picture details. So we'll go into the apply options here. We can see the different mathematical modes by which the effect is applied. We can adjust that and the intensity of the apply mode, and then mix back some of the original footage just to so we can see what's going on. So now we've got the texture working there, bit of a static texture, so I want to bring that to life, so I'll go and enable the shake parameter for the texture. So in this section here I can turn shake on, twirl open the shake parameters, and now I can change the randomness and the speed with which the texture is animated, so that gives us a little bit of dynamic kind of feel to the texture as well. So now we've got something that works as a kind of graphical background. I'd like to add a graphical title, so I'll add a new node here, and from the Continuum toolset I'll select Title Studio, which is in effect a full-featured 3D graphics application that can work as simply as a node in your setup. So I'll change the compositing mode to apply over. The default state of Title Studio is simply to type Boris FX in a standard style using the last font that the system remembered. But if we go into the effects browser and take a look at some of the examples of the presets that are shipped with the system, we can see that there's a broad variety of presets using different animation and effects to generate graphics. If you like any of the presets, you can load them up and then simply backspace over them and type your required content and set your font and so on. What I'm going to do here is not use a preset, I'm just going to start from scratch. So I'm going to cancel out of that and launch the Title Studio UI in a floating window here. So here's our text in the default style and the default font. If I select that element here, I can begin typing over it, changing the fonts and so on. What I'm going to do is completely clear all of that out, and I'm going to add a new flat text object with 3D lights, and that's the default text that's entered there. I'm going to select that and choose a suitably grungy font and enter the text for my title. And just jump into the lights and make light that a little bit more evenly. Something like that. And I'm going to render over grey so that I can concentrate on the typography. So there's my text that I want to animate in. Number of different ways that we can animate it. Obviously we can move objects around. You've got true 3D animation in here with a 3D camera and depth of field and so on. What I want to do is use a couple of processors to animate that on. So under shaders here you've got different types of processors. Deformers, which affect the geometry, and image processors, which do raster filters on top of that. So I'm going to choose the model displacer deformer, and then adjust the displacement so you can see that kind of breaks it up into its component parts. So what I've done here is I've got the animate button set here, so as soon as I go to a point on the timeline and animate something, then that sets a keyframe. So I'm going to set the keyframe there, and I'll go back here, set another one here, so it's kind of got a bit of life in it, so that's kind of jitters a little bit. And then at the beginning of the timeline I'll give that loads of displacement so that really breaks up, and then that comes together, and I'll just move the center of the displacement field around a little bit so that kind of jitters a little bit, so it kind of looks like it's living. So we're kind of animating it on at the beginning, and now I want to add a little bit of glow to that, so under shaders I can now add an image processor for this object, and I'll apply glow edge, and once again with the auto animate button enabled, I'm going to go in here and set the intensity quite high at the beginning, quite a lot of blur, and then as we resolve the logo, and I'll bring that down so that it's more readable. So something like that. So we'll animate that on, and then once again I'll put a couple of keyframes in there just so it jitters a little bit. Something like that. So now we've got our dynamic logo animation to reveal our text. Once again I can preview that over the live action if I need to. And if I hit apply, that's now applied over my stylized background. So the last of the Continuum tools I'm going to look at today is Particle Studio, which is a full-featured 3D particle generation system. I'll hit Launch Particle Illusion to launch the UI on a floating window and start sampling some of the thousands of emitters that are shipped with the software. In the preview window, got an interactive preview where the emitters are attached to my cursor so we can preview their behavior if they're animated. I want to make a firework display on this background clip, so I'm going to open the firework emitter presets and preview those in the preview window. Now I'll move to a point in the timeline where I want my first firework to go off, and then simply click on the screen to set the position where the firework goes off. And I'm ready to add the next one. So I'll select another emitter, preview that, choose the position for it, and preview it. A little on the large side, that one, so I'll just go in there and adjust the scaling of the emitter, make that a little bit smaller, and now choose another position on the timeline to set another firework off. Choose another emitter, position it, once again adjust the size. All of the parameters are adjustable, obviously we're just starting with presets here and modifying them slightly, and maybe one more, something like that. We'll place that one here and preview that. And when I hit apply, that's applied in my timeline. Play that through. And as with all of the Continuum effects, if I need to mask the foreground here, I can draw a Mocha mask and have that track if the camera's moving, but not necessary in this case. Moving on now from Continuum to Sapphire, which has a little bit of crossover in terms of tool set with Continuum, but tends to be favoured by the VFX community for the quality and realism, tweakability of its lens tools, optics, blurs and warps and so on. So we'll focus on those. More than 250 effects in the Sapphire family. So as with Continuum, a good place to start is with a browser. So if we launch SEffect, which is the Sapphire Builder, we'll return to this in a little bit more detail later. The advantage of using the preset browser in the Builder is that it gives us access to all of the effects, allows us to audition those with our live action footage. If I go back to the master effects list, that was some examples of Aurora. We go down to the bottom of the list and take a look at some examples of warp. We can audition these. What I'm actually after is glint, so I'll search for that and audition some of the presets. Grab a preset which is kind of close to what I'm after. So now I know what effect I'm looking for and what preset I'm after. So if we apply the Sapphire glint effect and enter the preset browser for the actual effect, then we can access the preset that I had earlier and load that directly onto the clip. And now I can start adjusting things with the on-screen widgets, which give me control over the major parameters. I'm just going to back off the threshold a little bit so it just triggers off the brightest highlights, something like that as a starting point. And now I can save another preset or carry on tweaking. Moving on to the next shot, I want to load a blur effect. What I'm after is the Sapphire Z blur tool. This enhances the depth of field, so I'm going to go and whack up the focal depth, whack up the depth of field, so to put that distant plane even more out of focus, before and after. Moving on, as I mentioned before, the blurs in Sapphire are particularly realistic and tweakable, and a good example of this is a relatively recent addition to the Sapphire toolset, which is Free Lens. Sapphire Free Lens simulates lens whacking, which is the basically detaching the physical lens from the camera and moving it around freely in space. Not something that you would normally recommend on a high quality camera because it can be rather dangerous, but this is a detailed simulation of that behavior. So for example, we can change the tilt in both axes of the detached lens, the distance of the lens from the actual camera sensor and so on. We can control the chromatic aberration and the lens distortion, the thickness of the glass and so on, and have control over the light leakage onto the sensor and the colour and so on. Choose something a little bit cooler for the colour scheme. And we can also animate the behaviour of the detached lens to give this a little bit of life. So if I open the shake details here and twirl down to the distance randomness, what I'm doing here is using a procedural animation tool to put some noise into the Z distance of the virtual lens from the camera sensor. So really good tool for generating ethereal, kind of organic blurs to give a little bit of life and texture to our digital footage. The next example, we're going to take a look at one of the most popular tools in the Sapphire family, which is Sapphire lens flare. So I'll go ahead and search for the lens flare tool and drag that into the node, the Resolve node tree. So again, with the on-screen widgets, I can adjust the default preset for the hotspot and the pivot, so on. And I'm going to launch into the preset browser to browse some of the huge library of presets. So here we can see we have quite a broad range of presets, ranging from the realistic to the more esoteric. I can choose from a preset and then use that as a starting point for further tweaking. So let's start with this guy here, load that preset, and we've got our general controls for the major parameters here. But if we want to get really deep into editing our lens effect, we have a dedicated tool called Edit Lens. So this is the flare designer. So within this floating window, we have control over each individual element of the flare and its orientation in 3D space, so we can get really deep into designing our flare. So what really needs a little bit of work is the hotspot, because that's a little bit too strong. So I'm going to adjust its position in Z and put that a little bit further back, and it's a little bit too bright, so let's back that off a little bit, make that a little bit more subtle, something like that. And up here we can see all the various elements that we can add to the flare. So I'm going to add some chroma rings here, and there's my chroma rings, and they've now been added into the composition. So now I've just basically designed a custom flare. So if we hit OK, there's my flare. And obviously, because it's a moving camera, we need to get that flare to follow the motion of the camera. And this is where Mocha comes in. As with Continuum, Mocha's toolset is integrated into Sapphire, both for masking and for animating spatial parameters such as lens positions and so on. So if we go into Edit Mocha, and that launches again in a floating window, we have dedicated area trackers to generate point track information for the hotspot and the pivot. I'm not interested in the pivot, only the hotspot. So if I place the hotspot where I want it to go, and then place the area tracker in a region that I want to track, and start the tracking process, and once it's complete I can save the Mocha project. And then choose hotspot uses Mocha as the option to position the hotspot, and now the hotspot is aligned to the track that I measured. If you have a very obvious light source in your footage, it's really not necessary to track using Mocha. We can use Lens Flare Auto Track. So Lens Flare Auto Track uses a highlight threshold to position the hotspot. So at the moment, highlight threshold is a little bit low. So if I bring that up so that it triggers off the brightest highlight, the sun, as that moves around, it triggers automatically. And because it's based on luminance, when it passes behind the talent's head, it's automatically occluded. So just a taste of some of the depth and subtlety that we can get into with regard to creating lens flares with Sapphire. It's worth noting that Sapphire effects and Continuum effects can be used as transitions between events in an editing timeline. So on the edit page of Resolve, I'm going to locate the Sapphire Transitions. And here are all of the available effects that can be used as transitions. I'm going to select Lens Flare and drag that to an event that has handles, trim it to length, select a preset from the inspector, load that in, and then preview the result. Lastly, we're going to take a look at the Sapphire Builder that allows us to build complex effects by combining any number of effects within the Sapphire toolset. So on the color page, I'll search for S effect and apply that to the current node. If I hit Edit Effect, I'm now in a procedural workspace where I can start stacking effects up. So to begin with, I'm going to use caustics and apply that between the source and the result, and that's applied with its default preset. Once again, I can go into the preset library, start browsing presets, and when I get something that I like, I can load that in, and I can start adjusting that from the UI. So there's my caustics effect. I also want to add a little bit of rippling to the shot, so I'll search for warps and drag warp waves in upstream of the caustics. Once again, I can go into the preset browser, pick a preset, load that in, and I can start adjusting the parameters as required. So now we've kind of got a warping clip with some caustics overlaid. Now I want to add a graphic element. So we can do this by means of adding a mask. At the moment the mask is open, but we can import a mask into the composition. Workflow for this varies from application to application, but in Resolve we can do this by adding a matte clip into the media pool. So if I go to my clip that I want to use as a matte, right click on that and add to media pool as a matte. I can go into the color page and then right click on my node and add that imported matte in as a matte for the effect. That's not what I want to do in this case. I want to use it as an input into the builder. So if I right click on here and add an OFX input and connect the RGB out of my matte to the RGB in, and once again return to the effect UI, now this is used as the mask input, and this can be used to hold back various effects. So the next effect I want to apply in the pipeline is an emboss effect. So let's put emboss distort in there, and by default emboss distort uses the luminance of the clip that I'm working on, but this has a bump map input here. So if I connect the mask luminance to the bump map input, then the luma is used as the emboss source. I'll also use that as a mask input to crop off the edge of the effect. I can now go and adjust the light, for example. So we're kind of going for a green light on this effect. So now we have green light applied here, and maybe we will whack up the brightness a little bit just to make that stand out from the background. Lastly, I want to add a little bit of life to the logo, so I'm going to search for a temporal filter. We'll add shake here, and we'll insert that into the matte channel, and we'll also take that output and attach it to the bump input for the emboss. So now when we go to the shake parameter, show the final result there, and turn up the amplitude. Now you can see that's kind of moving around as required. I can hit OK. Now that combination of tools is used as a unique effect for which I can save a preset as with any other effect. And now in the next shot, if I want to apply S effect, launch the preset browser, load that in, bring in my matte, and connect that to the OFX input. So using this workflow we can build custom effects or template graphics for easy repetition and consistency. During this session we've barely scratched the surface of the capabilities of the Continuum and Sapphire toolsets for OFX, so now we've set aside about 20 minutes for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, it's over to you. And I'd just like to give a shout out to videvo.net and pexels.com, which are the two sites from which I gathered the stock footage that I used in today's demos. So thanks to them. And over to you.